Hello, this is Michael Hexter, and welcome to Politics 2100 here on YouTube. So, I'm kind of in shock and I could say mourning for, I guess I could say I don't know, I didn't know Jordan Neely. Um, I might have passed him in the subway or on the street when he was performing his Michael Jackson routines. Um, but I am in mourning for our society and for New York City. Um, the what happened on May the 1st when Daniel Penny strangled Jordan Neely to death. And he did so in a way with wanton disregard for Jordan Neely's health and life. I think that qualifies for, and I'm going to title this video, it's about the murder of Jordan Neely. And I guess second degree murder, I suppose. Again, I'm not a lawyer. I've read a little bit about this, but I don't really see any way the evidence can be slanted so it's not second degree murder. In other words, Daniel Penny committing second degree murder on Jordan Neely, and I believe it to be a miscarriage of justice and malpractice by the police department, New York NYPD, not to arrest Daniel Neely, and not for the DA not to charge him with, at least manslaughter, if not second degree murder. And I know many of you have probably some similar feelings. I don't know if my feelings are any different than yours, or some of you might be objecting to what I'm saying. There is a massive campaign, even in the supposedly liberal New York Times, to problematize Jordan Neely and to whitewash, and that word is resonant in a number of different ways, Daniel Penny and what he did. It's basically, so if we lay out the facts just briefly so we can clarify what has been derived from the reporting to date. Now, there could be changes in that reporting, but I haven't seen anything that there were multiple witnesses to this crime, and there's ample videotape of it or cell phone recordings of it. My understanding is that Daniel Penny strangled Jordan Neely in a head hold, in a dangerous head hold for 15 minutes, which is my understanding that people tend to pass out very quickly after being in this head hold for not long. That Mr. Neely was about 95 pounds. It's my understanding, a very slight build, a man of very slight build. And I'm not sure what Daniel Penny's build is and was. But anyway, there were two people also helping Daniel Penny doing this. So, and also, I mean, he is not alone responsible. I mean, he is responsible for killing Jordan Neely, but he had accessories to this, and there are people who also should be charged as accessories, who were helping hold him down, and were cognizant of and allowing and facilitating Daniel Penny's actions in strangling Jordan Neely. And so also, I'm not hearing anything about Jordan Neely threatening any specific person in his time on the F train where he was killed. That he threw his jacket down. He said that he was hungry and he was willing to die. He might have made, for people who are not familiar with mentally ill people or disturbed people, made gestures or sounds that were, in the minds of some people who were very, very unfamiliar with what goes on in the New York subway on a regular basis, threatening to them, but or frightening to them. But it's my understanding that no direct threats were made, especially toward Mr. Penny. It seems like Mr. Penny thought of himself as perhaps as a hero of some kind, in a very misguided way, and in a way that was just, so there were a number of people that should have gotten him off Mr. Neely very rapidly, and they didn't. So that is part of the tragedy and the alarming sign that this incident shows about our society and about what goes on when people get together and in this case, marginalize further the already marginalized, or reinforce their own sense of value, personal value, by dehumanizing further, in this case, totally dehumanizing the people who are suffering the most in their immediate vicinity, and are uncomfortable with that, are made uncomfortable with it. And anyway, so and also I is my understanding that some persons told Mr. Penny that he was killing Mr. Neely. So or there were some, but it wasn't loud enough, it wasn't strong enough, it wasn't, and you had these two men who were helping Penny basically kill Mr. Neely. And so it's brutality in so many different ways, again, and it anyway, it exposes, so beyond these facts, which many of you already know, there may be new discoveries. Also, just beyond these things, so we have Mr. Neely apparently has a long history of run-ins with the law in different ways, in a manner typical of someone who has mental illness and is unhoused, is homeless, doesn't have a home, doesn't have a house, and also is mentally ill. And he there are videos of him doing things that are, nasty, and that he, and this is being used to impugn his character and essentially imply that Mr. Penny was aware of all these previous incidents of Mr. Neely being reprehensible in some way or another, verbally reprehensible, and also physically he did some crimes that are, but in any case, he was not aware of that. And this is not, I'm not saying Mr. Neely was an angel, but he didn't deserve to die. Okay. And he didn't deserve to die there. And he was not, it's my understanding, again, from all reports, he wasn't a physical threat to any of those people who were surrounding him. at that point in time. He was struggling in part because they were trying to tackle him and well, in this case, and also strangling the life out of him. Okay, or at least Penny was strangling the life out of him. So anyway, but this is a part of a long slide, a long decline in our society, and in our, and I'm titling this video that this is a a product of 50 years of neoliberal destruction of our Commonwealth, and of New York City, which is now New York City is the city that most sensitively registers the interpersonal dynamics. I mean, it's not the only place, but you see dramatized there the interpersonal dynamics of American society more generally. It's the most urban, the most people-dense place, and the most diverse, one of the most diverse, or the most diverse place in the United States. So you see the clash of, and also unequal place, not just diverse in the sense of ethnicities and people from all around the world, but also it's extremely unequal, and also it's a place that has been hollowed out, or that the 50 years of neoliberalism that really started with the 1973. In other words, neoliberalism sort of launched itself in 1973 when DC told New York to go F itself, and so that the cities like New York City would no longer be receiving such much federal support, and it became a sort of a political sport for politicians in Washington to basically point to places like New York and other cities as hellholes, and this is even from before then. There were the riots of the 1960s, and so the cities, not just New York, but the cities became emblems of the racial divide, the fact that there was an incomplete integration of, or incomplete, you could say integration or democracy. In other words, that there people, we were a two-tier or three-tier democracy, and or in fact, in places we discovered we were not even a democracy. We were a minoritarian, authoritarian society in the Jim Crow South, but also cities that were segregated and that were by various practices like redlining and the enormous upheavals in those places that occurred because people were some of the poorest people lived in cities and still do live in cities or around cities, and they were often confronted with their lack, the fact that they didn't have certain basic services, and then they lived in impoverished environments in various ways. Not just they themselves were impoverished, but the environment was impoverished. Their chances were reduced. There are still people there who, or there are people who were able to survive those through luck of their own, development, their own personal development, and their family, and so forth and so on, and they were able to rise up and in their own individual way, but that still left the whole society still divided, and the racism involved in how people were excluded from opportunity and excluded from healthy drinking water, healthy air, so forth and so on, from the way that our cities became structured, and that the government didn't have an idea how to deal with it, and didn't pursue, and in a way, you know, even its critics, the people, there wasn't a clear vision of what to do. And so what happened was that neoliberalism stepped in and did its own form of city transformation, and it was a city. So what happened was that basically in the 70s and 80s and 90s, people started to flock back after fleeing the cities in the 1960s. Certain people came back into those cities, white people, rich people, so forth and so on. They started to redesign the cities so that still excluded the poor people who lived in the cities, often people of color, and at the same time they used those reserve armies of labor to do, you know, service work for them, and so forth and so on. So, and also immigrants that came in to those places. So anyway, so there's no easy answers to what to do about it's more than 50 years really, but of neglect, and of, in a way, we were in the 1950s and 60s, for, you know, the descendants of former slaves, the Black Americans, you know, rose up and reminded people of their, you know, their second-class status, and they were given some legal opportunities for equal opportunities, so forth and so on. But then there was a backlash to that, and that has taken the form often of neoliberal policies that don't imagine a transformed city or transformed society that gives people the resources they need to actually realize equality of opportunity, and realize and create a common, multi-racial, multi-ethnic democracy that treats people equally, you know, based on their backgrounds and so forth and so on, their gender. And so anyway, this murder, of Jordan Neely is more specifically a sign of, well, one, I mean, you know, there's a lack of good policing and good mental health care for people who have mental illness, and also homelessness. So basically, the situation that Jordan Neely found himself in was created by the housing crisis, by the stripping away of mental health services, and also, I mean, I'm not saying that there was a golden age of mental health services before, but there haven't been attempts to update our mental health system and coordinate it with law enforcement, among other things, to have a sort of a public safety system, so that will allow people who are acting out their craziness, basically, in public in various forms, that they can have a place to go and do it in private, or do it and get care, among other things. Right now they don't have that. And so and this or not they, but most often the people of color who have these issues are less likely to have the resources to have some opportunity to get some care and also housing. So anyway, this act, though, even if we take the extreme, you know, situation that the homeless are in, it also shows that, you know, here is this rule of the, so I'm imagining that the people on the subway, and I'm just, you know, extrapolating from what I think I know about human beings and New Yorkers and so forth and so on, that that people attributed to Mr. Penny's actions, the reason why they didn't intervene is that they were, tired of having mentally ill people, acting out on the platforms and so forth and so on. And there are stories of, some mentally ill people have killed other people, through their delusional processes, and by pushing them in front of trains or so on. So there was some well-publicized incidents of that. So there's a real, anger at people like that. And so I imagine that the people on the train accorded to Mr. Penny's actions an authority that he didn't have in reality, but they gave it to him anyway. And some of that is that it's the authority of the most brutal, of the sadist, essentially, giving the sadist, the big bully, the power. And this is, you can see from this, among other things, Trumpism. Sort of Trump is one example of that, and Trump comes from New York, so it's not, even though New York is quote unquote blue, or is a democratic stronghold of the Democratic Party. It has tended also to promote to the head of that Democratic Party, including the current mayor and also the former governor, and for that matter, the current governor to some degree, a certain kind of callous law and order style politician. And law and order doesn't really mean law and order. It means a sadistic, a sort of cowering behind the police, and the police being an agency that tends to, when pretending to enforce the law, often breaks the law and creates a thugocracy. And so the attachment of many NYPD people, not all, but some NYPD, many of them the white, but not necessarily only the white officers, a admiration for Donald Trump and so forth and so on, is that they identify with this thugocracy. And so I imagine the people on the subway accorded to Mr. Penny's fixed and psychotic, in my opinion, or psychopathic maybe is a better word, strangulation of Mr. Neely, psychopathic being someone who lacks moral feelings, lacks empathy, fundamental empathy, and acts aggressively, aggresses on other people, and or sometimes also in a planful and cold and calculating manner. Anyway, certainly I don't know, what the psychological evaluation of Mr. Penny would yield, but anyway, he acted in that way, in that manner, in which he was devoid of sympathy for and empathy for Mr. Neely, fundamentally in that he was choking him to death. Okay. And he was using a move that he, as a Marine, should know is deadly. And doing it for 15 minutes, even more deadly. So more than a minute is deadly. So potentially. So anyway, especially with an emaciated man who says he's hungry, so forth and so on, maybe other health conditions, who knows. So anyway, my idea, or that the people in the subway were attributing to Mr. Penny an authority based on his thuggishness, his psychopathic, that he was the most violent, that he was willing to do the violence against this nuisance, okay, this person who was a nuisance to the people in the subway, who was vaguely threatening to them, and at least according to reports that we have. So anyway, so that this um, authority that he was given was, in my mind, a piece of the fascist wave in our society, and in which the chief thug, Donald Trump most often, though there are other people competing for that chief thug role. The chief thug is supposedly the most violent, or the person who issues orders and issues commands, either subtly or not subtle. In other words, by incitement, okay, rather than directly command. But anyway, incites violence and incites threat and creates an environment of threat and violence around him. Okay, so anyway, so that this, I'm imagining that in that subway, that this society that we have become is in part the reason why people didn't pry Mr. Penny off Mr. Neely, and treat him as the criminal, treat Mr. Penny as a criminal, even though Mr. Neely may have been committing some minor nuisance or whatever, public nuisance, so on and so on, nowhere near murder. Okay, and so anyway, so we have people though who are using the nuisance factor, the discomfort factor of seeing people like Mr. Neely on the subway, of hearing from them. They're equating that with, or they're saying that justifies the psychopathic, murderous actions of another individual. And this happens not just in that subway car, but it happens in other places. And the police often take on this role, this role of chief sadist or licensed sadist or whatever it is, and the big bully. Okay, the big, in some cases the police might use that to deter crime in some circumstances, but they would need to use it judiciously and not as a entire personal entire personality, so to speak. But that has become the personality of many in the cops, and so many police people. All right, and so anyway, but we have here in the subway someone acting out a non-police officer acting it out, and people treating him as if he has the same authority as police. So anyway, what we see there is kind of the kernel, or a demonstration of this thugocracy that and to fight that thugocracy, we need to have actual rule of law. Okay, so it doesn't mean Mr. Neely good and Mr. Penny bad. It doesn't mean taking side, attributing them to different political sides, even though there are people who are doing this right now, and they're trying to sort of split the difference, or whitewash Mr. Penny and downgrade Mr. Neely, who was the victim. Okay, clearly the victim. Not only the victim in this case, he was a victim of other things, but he also victimized other people. It's not as though there was a child that he, not this incident, but that he kidnapped, or there were he was in great pain, which doesn't justify him inflicting pain on other people, but we need to look at, he can't be the symbol. We all have our pains, we all have things that are bothering us, and we need to find the society where we don't act out those things out, either politically or in terms of violence against other people, so forth and so on. But right now, our society is a society that is tending more and more toward this violent a society that's prone to violence, then that's armed for violence, most often and largely on the right wing, cannot be both sides. It's clearly very strong on the right wing, and that's clearly, and also the supposed censure is very frightened of the right wing and acts like the New York Times did in its treatment of this incident, as if, whitewashing Mr. Penny's actions and making Mr. Neely seem to be it's a justified killing in some way or another, that there's justification for it, or that justifies the police in, allowing Mr. Penny to go. And so, we cannot, quote unquote, clean up our, some of this is about our problems of our society are our society's problems. They're not, we can't dump them on some of the people who carry the most or more of the suffering. Okay, we need to look at all, how this society creates suffering and how we are avoiding dealing with that suffering by stigmatizing other people and dumping it on them, and in this case also, allowing someone to kill another person who's a symbol of that. Anyway, I may be talking about this in future episodes, but I wanted to share this now, and I hope you can share your thoughts in the comments below, and please like the video if it resonates with you in some way or another, and please subscribe to Politics 2100 to get notice of other future videos. Thanks.